Hi, good night for you, Simon. I hope you're doing very well. Welcome to the Impact Revolution channel, and thank you so much for making time for us today. How are you doing?
Good, Yoshi. Thank you very much. I'm doing well, thanks. Yeah.
All right. We are like 12 hours apart. Here is 10 in the morning.
Right. Yes.
So it's a very interesting interview. We are like in the other side of the world. So that's very interesting. And it's the first time. So thank you for that. And thank you for
You're
making
welcome.
time. Yes.
No, my pleasure.
So So, Sai, I would like to ask you a couple of personal questions first, and then we can go to the more business life kind of lessons learned questions,
Sure.
just to get you know a bit better. Okay. All right.
Sure. Sounds good.
So, Simon, one question that I really like is if you could wake up tomorrow anywhere in the world, where it would be and why?
Hmm. Um, it's a really good question. You know, I'd probably say years ago I would have probably might have said somewhere like France, for
Okay.
example. But in the last few years, I think it's taken a while for this to sort of catch up because I've been in Asia for many years now. It's
Yes.
somewhere probably in Asia, and I've just got back from Hokkaido. I've been in Hokkaido for over the winter,
Nice.
and it had a big impact on me actually, being there.
Okay.
Um, and Hokkaido is very cold uh,
Uh-huh.
over the winter. Lots of snow. I was in a resort. So I don't know if I would say that would be probably one place would be there. Maybe going
Okay.
back to Hokkaido, waking up in Hokkaido. As much as I love Tokyo, and I've
Uh-huh.
come to enjoy Tokyo.
Uh-huh.
This was a bit of a life-changing moment for me over the last few
Okay.
months. Spending some time in Hokkaido, doing some projects. So yeah,
All right.
maybe
Uh,
that's probably Hokkaido. Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting. You know, I've been there as well. I was wondering what made you feel this connection, or what made you feel this way there.
I spent a lot of time working with some entrepreneurs up there. So they're
Oh, okay.
involved in many different aspects of the resort business at
Okay.
Niseko, which is Niseko is particularly renowned for its powder snow.
Okay.
And so I've been working with some property management people and hospitality people. And then I just met a whole range of people from all different aspects who have been there for
Okay.
many years. Actually, they've been living in Japan as long as I've been living in Japan, but they've just spent their pretty much entire time, 10,
Uh-huh.
15 years in Niseko,
Okay.
building their businesses. And it's like I've been looking for these people for many years, but didn't know where they were. Because these types of people don't exist in Tokyo. Tokyo
Oh,
is a very different place. So uh, getting to meet these
interesting.
people and then talking with them, and that was a really life-changing experience for me, actually.
All right. Very good. Very
Yeah.
beautiful. Nice. Okay. Glad to hear that. Thank you for sharing that side. What the next question will be, what was so far your happiest moment in your life, or what is the first thing that comes to your mind?
Yeah, I'd probably have to say, I have two children, so
Okay.
I think most people say when their children are born that it's the happiest
Yes.
time. I didn't think that was necessarily the case for me. I think it was a bit of a stressful time,
Okay.
and sometimes it takes a while. I think some people are very naturally become a father very naturally. For me, it's taken a while to understand what that means
All right.
and to understand how to be a father. Even I'm still learning. I'm still learning it in a way.
All right.
But now
Interesting.
after a good, my oldest son is 16.
Okay.
So finally, after 16 years, and when you can look back at photographs or look back at memories from that time, you can sort of see how far you've come along the journey. And it's
Hmm.
now that only now I begin to realize what's happened and what I've been, the journey I've gone on with them.
All right.
Um, so probably, so it's the accumulation of that. It's accumulation of growing into becoming a father because you don't just, even though your children are born and that changes your life forever, you have to earn it. I think you have to earn
Uh,
that time and what you put into it, and that's difficult. I think managing that. I think
All right.
people, not everyone is naturally able to kind of spend a lot of time with their children as they'd like to, and then they have work commitments, or they have a focus. Maybe they've got unachieved goals they want to try and achieve. So
Uh-huh.
it's very interesting time
All right.
for that, I think, as well. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. Interesting. What will you share that is your biggest advice you could give someone who is going to be a father after all this experience?
Oh, yeah. Um, I mean, I guess the question is that they know they're going to be becoming a father. Is that right? That it's
Yes,
already
yes.
happened.
So imagine
Right.
for me, I haven't been a
Yeah.
father yet. So what
Okay.
advice would you give to a young adult
I
that
mean,
who
anyone
may
who
have
is
a father
anyone who's
future?
considering it, I mean, I think make sure you really feel that you can do it. I think it's probably more of a feeling than a thought, you know.
Okay, sure.
Um, make sure I think that your life is a bit stable as more as possible. Um,
Yeah.
I think also try and be patient with it all. And maybe not
Patient.
take it so seriously at the same time as well.
Mm,
Um, we may want to start taking some of these things very seriously with it all, but I think sometimes being a bit hands off with it and then coming
mm,
in when you really need to.
mm. All
Um,
right.
and I think probably lastly is dads can be more they can spoil their children a bit more. I think mothers have a different role. Their mothers, especially in the early part of the life of the children, say under 10, the mother's very critical, I think. As the
Uh-huh.
children get beyond 10 years old, the father, I think, has starts to play more of an important role
Uh-huh.
because I think they help their children adjust their expectations for the world.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, men, I think, have a bit of a better, I think always sometimes have a bit of a better way of looking at that. And I think that's where I've been adding value that way rather than sort of handling the details too much. I've been sort of helping them out with the big picture.
All right.
Um,
Very good.
yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It's like society has like a father role and a mother role, right? And the father
I
is
still
like
think
the
that's true. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I don't, I still firmly believe in that because this has been going on for how many ever million,
Yeah.
thousands of years families have been around, and I just don't think you
Sure.
can change that
Uh-huh.
in the last 10 years or whatever. So I still think that's important. Yeah.
Okay. All right, very good. That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Sai. So now I wanted to get to know you better in a professional way or
Okay.
in kind of life way. So if I was asking you to think about someone who really admires you, who really respects you, okay, and highly and knows you very well, okay, how that person will define who is Simon Clancy.
Um, there was one. Maybe I can share a little story.
Okay,
Um, there
that's
was
great.
in my sort of last corporate job. There was a guy I sort of had. He was my number two, I guess. He was a guy that I sort of made my,
Okay.
you know, senior person. I sort of positioned him in a sense below me. He's a Japanese guy,
Okay.
and very. I think there was some things. Obviously, he sort of had a very different experience from me.
Mm-hmm.
But I had announced that I was leaving, and it was quite a shock to him. Even though actually he was leaving as well. He was actually planning to leave at some point, and he actually
Okay.
left a little bit after I did. But he said to me that I was the only one in the company that had any vision, and
Okay.
I guess I guess that was a compliment to me. I guess because I think that's kind of quite a fair comment.
Okay.
Um, it might have been a bit of a critique on maybe the current management. Um,
Uh-huh.
but I think that was what I was there for too. And I'm actually a person that will come in and can be at times when I need to be disruptive to make change happen. And
Okay.
sometimes not everyone is going to agree with that or like that. But if I've been given a brief to do that, or if that definitely that's where things are heading, um, I think there's a way of saying it and not saying it. But
Hmm.
um,
And I
um,
suppose you left that company because that vision or that change was not allowed or was not
I
accepted or something like that. Could be.
I think it was one of those situations where it was look at what people do, not what they say.
Mm,
Um, and
okay.
I think the intent of it was actually to be very fair, the change that I had inhibited that I brought was probably enough, and I don't even think that was sustainable. What I meant by that is once the changes I had brought in, and even if I had stepped back, it started becoming a vacuum again.
Mm, okay.
So it tells me that perhaps the business wasn't sorted out with its right client match. The clients weren't matching up properly.
Mm,
There's a lot of issues, and I think it was part of a holding company as well. So the problem with those companies is that they have very stringent P&L targets to hit every quarter and every
mm,
year. And what happens in the end with that is that compromises are made on who they start working with, or why they've been working with people, and then you get issues with talent, and that's when the problems start. You
mm,
know,
mm. All right.
so
Sure.
yeah.
All right. And talking about this vision and
Mm,
this long-term purpose, right?
yeah.
What is your why, side? Or what would you say is your why?
My why, I think, yeah. This is a good question. Thank you. This is something
No
that
problem.
I was actually reflecting a lot bit on this. I wouldn't say it was my why so much, but the last sort of 2 years, I've been going
Uh-huh.
through a bit of a process of working out where I came from and what I enjoyed the most.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you start to when you go through, especially a corporate career, you can tend to make compromises, and then especially as incentives are put in front of you, and the incentives increase, you start compromising even more actually on what you kind of really want to do or what you believe in. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
that definitely happened with me. I definitely started making compromises with what quality meant to me, like quality of output, quality of thinking, the types of way I wanted to do relationships with customers, for example. I had a very different point of view on that.
All right.
Um, and even it's interesting actually. I was watching or listening to something the other day about culture, corporate culture,
Mm-hmm.
and where you've got some people who are um, I don't know if inclusive is the right word, because that's not probably the way it was described. It was more of a culture of, I think, I guess, acceptance of everything, and then even if everything was average, which means risking the business, versus, I say, a culture of performance. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that can be challenging as well, in working in organizations where those values might be different from your own.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in those situations, sometimes it's best that you do go off and find your own way. And for me, it was really just asking myself which projects that I worked on and which clients did I like the most.
Mm-hmm.
And I came back to a few things, but also I came back to the relationships I had made. Two
Mm-hmm.
relationships in particular with clients um, in Asia.
Mm-hmm.
One was a person I worked with and for in China, who was incredible, a very charismatic Chinese woman.
Okay.
Um, and I think what I brought to her was I guess I think I brought a combination of two things. and it seemed to have the same effect when I did this in Japan as well with a Japanese CMO I
Okay.
worked with.
All
And
right.
what I would say it was definitely a Western way of looking at things,
Okay.
but done and delivered in a way that made sense from, say, a Far East point of view, and say, like we'd say it was, a Chinese context, and then maybe it was a Japanese context,
Okay.
um, and that seemed to sort of cut through and resonate with those two people on say particular projects in the way that I work with them.
Mm-hmm.
And for life of me, I don't know how I got to that. I really don't know how I
Do
got
you
to
have an
resonate.
example, practical example that you could share with us regarding what you just shared?
Yeah, I mean, I think um, for I mean, I worked on at Jaguar Land Rover in China on the Jaguar business, and it was at a time when Jaguar was beginning to reinvent itself. So it's about 10 years ago, and in China had no background. There was no history or heritage of Jaguar at all.
Mm.
You need to understand that 10 years before that, a lot of people were riding bicycles in China.
Mm.
So I had to get to a point where, and for me coming, and then what was happening at the same time was there was a lot of direction coming out of the UK, or where the brand was heading, for
Mm.
example, and I had to sort of find a way to consolidate that direction, but really find something unique that would make sense for us in China and what we were doing, the timing and the pacing of where we were at. And so I had put forward there was it was a project proposal, and I had written some strategic work for that, and I think the way I framed it was something that had a lot of cultural context, I think.
Mm.
And the client, you know, she actually excitedly clapped her hands and said yes and jumped out of the chair in the
All
boardroom. And
right.
I'd never seen a reaction like that from anyone before. So it told me that I was on something the right way. I was going in the right direction
Yeah.
with how I was working with her.
Okay.
Um, and I think it's because I had that angle that I think a Chinese person can do, but a Western person who hadn't been in Asia or even in China that couldn't do it either. And to
Mm.
give you some context too, I lived in Japan for a while before that, so coming to Japan sort of broke me down a little bit. Like I was quite my point of view of the world was very occidental before that, and when I came to Japan, that started to change just by learning language a bit and understanding different ways of seeing things. Not that I began to accept it straight away. I didn't. I kind of pushed back a lot. There was a lot of resistance still. But what I did crack, and that's what I did. It was just finding that way where both those two worlds can come together and
That's
create
right.
new meaning and a new language. Is guess what? And I sort of did the same thing in Japan when I came back to Japan. And it does help though. You need to have the right type of client who also sees the world that way as well, and it has to be the right situation, the right context, the right brand, the right timing. But when those things are line up, you can really place something in there, and it can have a big impact. Um,
All right.
yeah,
All right. Thank you, Sai. Very interesting what you shared. So now, in few words, what would you say is your why? After all these experiences, and because you talk about
yeah.
relationships, you talk about what you enjoy the most or who you
I
enjoy the
think
most working with, right? Mm.
I think my why comes back to helping visionaries um, bring what they want to do to the market, to the marketplace. Um, and what I'm quite strong at is whether that is if they've got a business idea or if they've got a particular challenge, and they're visionary about it. If someone, I mean, sure, I could always help someone who um, just wants to execute something, but I don't
Uh-huh.
really think I have any true value in there. I think they can always find someone to do that. Um,
Okay.
I'm actually quite good at also helping someone take what they've done and take it further. And I've done
Okay.
that recently also with a person quite close with on a socially and quite close with the person, and we got together and started articulating a hospitality concept that he couldn't take. He actually had some of the ideas, but working with me, we took it even a step further, adding new richness to it. And so I think this person has a vision, but I've helped articulate that vision, and I've added my vision to it too. And so this idea of vision, and it comes back to a bit when someone, my former colleague said that to me when I left the company. It started sticking with me a bit, but it's taken many years for this to sort of work and make sense. I didn't really understand what it meant beforehand, but I've always come into something and um, have tried to do look at old problems in new ways.
Mm.
That doesn't mean I'm saying that I'm being inventive or an inventor, or not at all. I'm not that inventive. I'm not that creative, but I definitely have an ability to kind of look at a problem in a new way and find a way then to kind of bring it to life. And then I need good people to come and help me execute that too.
Of course, yeah. That's Yeah,
Yeah,
very interesting, because you talk about vision and then you talk about the articulating this vision in the strategic way to be
yeah,
actionable, right? So it's
yeah.
understood it well. And in that sense, because there is a lot of people with great ideas, right? But they have or they struggle with this execution part or the strategic part that will get them to achieve this vision or this goal. And having that in mind, what is your main life lessons or business lessons learned or regarding this to make that strategy or that action plan, let's say,
Mm.
more accurate or stronger or effective? Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast, I think, the other day. Um,
Okay. From who?
I've been experimenting with pricing models, how to price things properly in a new way, a different way. And the
Okay.
podcast was talking about ideas versus execution.
Mm.
And I think it had something to do with they then brought up the idea, this conversation that was happening between some Hollywood executives. And the Hollywood executives said that execution is everything. You shouldn't be coming in here talking about new ideas. And he said, no, well, actually, that's the reason why there is, so many Harry Potter films. You know,
Mm.
they keep making sequels to these things. I mean, if you have this Fast and the Furious, I think they made like 10 of them or something. Right? It's just all about execution. Right? I
Uh,
think the world,
I
Hollywood
stopped
is an
watching after
example.
the second or the third one. The Tokyo one, I think, was the last one.
I mean,
Yeah.
Hollywood is an example of a platform, if you want to say, that should be highly creative,
Uh-huh.
but yet isn't. It is completely driven by implementation and driven
Mhm.
by um, margin. And margin is important, by the way, but
Mhm.
I think it's because I think it's very important though to think about the differentiation, the distinction, I should say, even that you're bringing to
Mhm.
the table.
Okay, very good. Differentiation, right?
Actually, I'd say distinction is more important because being different doesn't necessarily mean you're being relevant. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The distinction, being
Uh-huh.
distinctive, means that you stand out and you have something that you can only you can own.
Okay.
And I think that's an important point too. Is once you find that distinction, um, you can own it. You can start to own it. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for a while there, I was exploring ideas of actually leaving Asia altogether.
Mm-hmm.
But it took me. It wasn't until I started looking around and I sort of, hang on, I've got something quite unique here. People actually started coming to me to know more about Asia. Like they were actually seeking me out to know more, to learn more. And that's when I realized, hang on, I've got actually a lot of value to have here. And so people in the US now have come to me specifically for this knowledge. and my experiences. And as I said, I spent 4 years in China. I lived in 2 cities in China, and I traveled extensively in China. And I did the same when I lived in Singapore. The lucky part of my job I had was as a strategist, I was able to conduct a lot of research, which meant I was able to kind of really interact with normal people.
Mm, that's
And
very
then
good.
you sort of you develop an eye for that. You develop an eye of observation. Um, and even now, it's still with me. So, um, you start these skills don't leave you, and you carry them with you. And you either then can plan using that for
Mm-hmm.
planning to execute, but
Mm,
also more importantly, you can diagnose and you can think. That's probably more the important part. Planning is important too. I think one of the things about planning we need to keep mindful of is allow for room for changes.
yeah, be flexible
Um,
and adaptable, yeah,
yeah,
wherever it happens.
because right, you want to have something on paper that is that can be moved around at times.
For
As long
sure.
as you get to some type of landing zone, I use the idea of a landing zone rather than a target. And you've got to make sure. I think this is the other thing too. This is another important lesson I learned living in this
Okay.
part of the world
Yeah.
is especially if you're Western and you're in Asia, you can come
Okay.
into things very idealistically, um, and that's fine because you've got very different context, and you've got a lot of reference, especially if you're in marketing and what have you. You've got a lot more reference than exists in Asia because the reference for Asia is much shorter timeline here,
Okay.
where we're talking about proper marketing being implemented and being done. But in the West, we've got much more longer history of it, and so you need to kind of uh, be mindful of how that can be executed,
Uh huh. Okay.
and that there will be limitations on resources, or that the teams or people that you're working with won't understand it the way you will.
Yeah, of
So
course. Yeah, there's
what you need to
cultural
do
difference,
there
right?
is, yeah, I mean, for example, I was on a call with someone today, and I'm working on a project with someone, with an organization, and I was on a call with someone who handles all the digital aspects for them, this brand, and we were talking about changes we need to bring. But before we got into that too much, I actually asked them, well, what's the current capability, or what capability do you think you can have going forward? Because that will help us decide what to focus on first or what to change. And what it does, it just removes all that friction, and so implementation becomes better. Yeah,
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Sometimes I guess it requires ideas or new ideas. This distinction that you talk about,
yeah,
and other times it requires implementation and action, right? When things are
yeah.
not
And and and,
clear.
and this is something correct. And this is something, if you are a strategic type person, or if you're an inventor or a creator, this is where the discipline and patience comes in, because you've got to really know when to stop, or when to say, hey, hang on, this is not needed. And this is why I would encourage anyone working in projects to spend time with people in finance. So for some reason, I've always had this fascination with finance. I've always found I read financial articles a lot. I'm always looking at the economics of countries and of businesses. When I would work when I was working in the advertising world, I would spend a lot of time with the financial directors and actually go out to lunch with them
All right.
and
That's
ask
good.
questions about P&L and margin, and how can we make better margins and that sort of thing. I was always asking questions about business models and things like this. So the reason why I say that is because some things are just not worth it. Some things are just not
Yeah.
worth fixing.
It doesn't make any financial sense in a way, right?
Not only
Yeah.
that, it just doesn't make any. I mean, even
Oh, well, any
I
sense,
mean,
right?
it might even make any sense, but you might just be emotionally attached to it, and
Yeah.
and you've got to be more objective at times and step away and say, look, because if
That's the
you're
sunk cost fallacy, right? They talk
yeah, if
sometimes.
you're advising someone on and if you want if someone comes to you and they've got a particular problem and your heart is too much involved in it, your emotions and your ego is in too much involved in it,
Mm,
you start making bad recommendations. It's a bit like it when you go to see a doctor and the doctor hasn't done any he's a heart surgeon, let's say, and the doctor hasn't done any surgery for 8 months and is really keen to do it and wants to help this person, but that may not be the right solution.
mm,
It might be something else. It might be diet. It might be something. It might be something much simpler.
sure.
So I would encourage people who are in advisory or who are in consulting or who are doing that to be very mindful of that.
Yeah, be
Um,
detached, right? Less.
yeah, you need to detach yourself a bit more, and
Yeah.
by doing so, you'll become more objective. But you also need to know that also will give you the trust that you need. And I think that trust point is important, especially for the part of the world I'm in, because
Mm,
in the West, trust is sort of given to us. When you meet someone and you start conducting business with them, you
mm,
begin at a high level of trust. But in the Far East, I'd even say even all of the East, going into India, going across over to to the Arab states, I'd
yeah,
almost
totally.
argue it's the same across the board there. That trust begins at the bottom, and you
Mm,
got to work your way up the scale. And so the only way,
interesting.
and if you're not from their culture, the only way that starts to happen is if you're, in my experience, was if you show them that you don't have an agenda and that you're on their side. Now you've got to not. It's not about playing politics. It's just about,
Mm,
and it's not certainly, and also you've got to really manage the way you talk to people as well. This was a hard lesson for me to learn. I learned that this the hard way. I made mistakes with this
sure.
many
Yeah,
times, and it took me a
yeah.
while to kind of get my head around it. But
I
now
come.
that I've got it, it makes a big difference. Yeah,
I understand what you say. Yeah, I work with Arabs as well. So, and my father is Japanese as well. So, this trust thing is very important. And without that, you
yeah,
cannot go anywhere, right? And they
yeah.
will not trust, they will not invest in you, they will not. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, okay.
So
Definitely.
you got to build the
Very good.
relationship. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Shai. We are at the end of the interview. It was very
Great.
quick. Just wanted to ask you a last question. There was a last message or last recommendation or biggest recommendation you can share to start as an entrepreneur.
Mm.
What will it be?
I learned something the hard way in the last 24 months.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I actually had been working on a new way of doing something. I actually had cracked it. I'd done in my last corporate job a way of doing things more effectively and more efficiently, and I tested it out and it worked.
Okay.
When I left that job and started to try and work in on my own partnership, the mistake I made was I went out first and built a company rather than look for a customer.
Mm,
And while I was doing that, I was started to try to sort of perfect the innovation.
mm,
And what happened there was it started to kind of quickly dawn on me that, hang on, none of this is connecting. And in a sense, also, I was doing things I didn't really want to do. And what
mm,
my true value wasn't being used or utilized. Yeah. So what I'd done was the way I sort of reframed this was I said, well, why don't I sort of just build this stuff out, but don't overcook it and just leave it to the side and then start to go and find the customers I'm
customers.
looking for, the type of profile I'm looking for, but don't sell them anything. Just
Mm,
connect with them and just see where it goes. And then luckily, with a bit of luck, and I went out of my way, and some things happened, and then it sort of started to kick off. Now, what I'm doing now, some people call this product to market fit. I think that's a bit of a binary way of looking at it. My suggestion would be is that this is really like a positioning. You're really trying to position what you're doing,
mm,
and that is more important than product to market fit because products can always be changed. That's a very engineering way of looking at it, and I understand that. But that'll change. Your engineering, your needs will always change. but you want to get that right type of audience first, and the idea that what you're doing could potentially scale. If you want scale, fine.
Mm.
If you don't want, not everything has to be scaled either. I think there's this whole. I think this is changing a bit. I think since there's been a bit of an implosion, we know now in venture capitalism, there's been obviously this big implosion in the last couple of months, and especially since the last 2 weeks or whatever it was. But I think that those days of just like high aggressive growth and that's all finished. I think my comments would be is to kind of take it slower and be a bit more organic and be patient, but really find the right customers. And if it and be happy with the kind of growth you can get. Not all businesses need to last 100 years,
And they won't.
That's
I think
another thing that we
more,
tend to think that we need to have
in the
businesses that
future.
last. Yeah, like Facebook pretends it wants to last for all this long time. It doesn't need to. It's done its job. Once it's done its job, it's time to move on.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Shai. I don't know if you want to leave any last words, or we can call it off for today. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Yoshi.
Thanks.
It was surprisingly different to what I thought, and
Thank you.
good questions, and I was happy to be part of it. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for making time, especially during the night at yours.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Simon.
Cheers.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Ciao. Ciao. Ciao.
Bye.